This video is a brief instructional video on removing the propeller control cable for a Cherokee 6. Older, this is a 68 model. Not overly complicated, but a little bit of stuff to get in. So the cable is held in via a nut on the back side. Get underneath there. There's a nut that you have to loosen from the instrument panel. Take that all the way off. And then it's as simple as disconnecting the cable through all its various points in the airframe. So this cable runs down to the back side of the baggage firewall. We got to follow the cable all the way around. It goes through a little phenolic block here on the left side by the pilot. A little phenolic block sits on those brackets and then goes through the firewall there into the baggage compartment and then onto the engine side. Probably the most difficult part is removing this phenolic block here because it's connected on the other side, so you might need two people for that. And then we're just going to trace this all the way to the engine and disconnect it from the engine side. The next place you'll need to get access to is the baggage compartment. So you have to take the floor off like you were going to open your battery. And then the cables, the engine control cables run under the left side or the pilot side of the floor here. They come through the firewall there. On the back side of this is the pilot's feet. So the spacer here, that phenolic spacer, these are the hardware for that. So you may need somebody to hold the screw on this side while you loosen the nut on the opposite side. And then down by the battery, the cable goes into the firewall. There's little bulkhead fittings here. You can loosen those, you'll need to loosen those. And then on the engine side, they come out here on the pilot side and go to the various controls. This one I've already disconnected from the prop cable, so this goes up through the front baffling through this bracket that connects onto here. So you need to loosen this bracket here. And then there's a hole right there. It goes up through, comes up through this hole and then connects to the bell crank on the prop governor here. So take the connection off there. You're going to need to save the connection if you get a new cable. Gotta figure out what I did with it. Oh, there it is. So I took that off. It's just a little ball and socket joint. This threads on. This threads onto the cable part in the governor side. So take that off. You'll need to save that unless you're replacing it. And then we just have to disconnect all of the connection points and then essentially feed this cable. So the cable goes through here, goes up around, goes through a bracket. Well, I have these cables off. I'm going to redo the clamps on those. It goes in through the bulkhead here. So to get it out, we got to disconnect all our attachment points and we're just going to feed it through the holes. We'll come back to here. We'll pull it through this hole. We'll feed it up into the cockpit area below the pilot's feet. And then to remove it, once we disconnect all of the attach points, there's that phenolic block there. There's a couple attach points and clamps up there, and then it goes into that. So once all that's loose, we'll take this nut off. And then we're going to start feeding this cable back through the instrument panel. So the whole cable goes in through the front of the instrument panel. In your head, you might think you take this button off and you just shove it through the tube. That doesn't work like that. But loosen this nut here. Take that nut on the back side all the way off, and then we're going to feed the whole cable through this hole. We're essentially just going to pull this out through this opening. And then when we put the new cable in, we're just going to reverse it. We're going to put the cable in from this side. We're going to go through the nut on the back, down through all our different clamps, go through the firewall there, and just feed it back through the other side of the engine. So it's not overly complicated, just a couple basic steps. and that'll be a prop cable swap. Cable fed up into the cockpit area. The only thing left to do is slide the cable out of the house, and we're just going to feed that cable back up through the instrument panel. There's the nut. When we go back in with the new cable, we got to make sure we put that nut on the end of the cable first and feed it up there. Otherwise, once you feed that all the way through to the engine, you won't be able to put that nut on afterwards. So start pulling it out. You may have to feed it, so I'm not sure. I don't have the GoPro. Might need two hands. Try to hold the camera and do the job at the same time. Now this old cable's all oily and greasy, so take care not to drag the cable across your fresh interior. Customers don't like that, and neither do I. Feed the cable out. There's the old cable. Alright, now to put a new one in. Fun times. Here we have the new to us propeller cable. It's the same part number, salvage. I'm going to use my credentials to inspect it and determine it to be serviceable, but make sure your cable length is obviously the same if you ever buy a salvageable part, just to ensure that it's correct. Make sure it moves smoothly, unlike the old one. Doesn't move. I think the cable itself inside of the vernier mechanism is unwound, because it'll pull it one direction but it binds up and doesn't send the cable that way. I think I will end up cutting this open later just to look at it. Got a blue knob versus a black knob. The original one came with a black knob and somebody just painted it, so I'll just, instead of taping this off, I'll just pull the knob off and move it over to this one after I install it. But so cable's ready to be installed. So getting ready to install the new cable, or new to us cable. We have to take that nut off. That nut actually goes on the back side of the instrument panel to capture the cable. So obviously we have to take that off first, slide that all the way around the end of the cable, take it off on the end, take it off here, start to feed this cable into the hole, put the nut on the back side, and then we can feed this through the nut. That way when the threaded portion of the vernier section comes in contact with the instrument panel, we can just feed that nut up and tighten that from the back side as we do that. So that's what we're going to do next. So I got my rod end. We've got our new nut and lock washer, so we're going to hold that up. Behind the wall. Then we're going to take our cable and just start feeding that through the hole. Now when we do this one, we're just going to go back through all our original routing. So the cable is going to come down here, go to a firewall and a clamp, and then it's going to travel over to this side on the pilot side to that phenolic block. We'll feed it through there, and then we'll feed it through the baggage and then through the firewall on the front. Secure all that and then terminate it on the prop end. So here, we're going to feed this up and then we'll thread that in. Here inside the baggage compartment, we've poked our cable through the firewall at the feet of the pilot, and then we're going to feed this cable It's ultimately going to go to a clamp here to this, but I see the clamp is all ratty. So I'll put a new clamp on there so we can just feed this through our firewall rings. It's got to go through that. There's a little rubber grommet that goes in there as well. So we'll feed that prop cable through there. Which will come out on this side of the firewall. It'll go through this grommet and that cap there, and we'll feed it to the prop. This spot here, there's a screw that comes in from the baggage side and goes into a nut on this side, so this you really need 2 people for. So if you got a helper, you'll need a helper for that part. And in that case, I'll wait for my helper to cinch this down, but we'll get the cable run through and do all that. So that'll be next. Okay, once you've fed all of your cable through the firewalls, you've taken all the slack up, and your vernier part of the control cable is close, you can slide that into the hole. And then at the same time, take that big nut and lock washer, slide that up, and you can thread that on. Once you slide that in there, the threaded part will go through the firewall. On the back side, we'll take that nut, slide that up over the housing. Make sure you're not pinching any wires or anything up in there, but run that thread and you'll just run that nut all the way to the firewall here. You run it all the way to the firewall there on that side. This nut, there's not really anything to tighten on this. All this does is capture the vernier part of the control cable. So if you loosen this, you'll just pull that out of this housing, so that really doesn't have any effect on the cable from the back. So you'll thread that in and run your nut down and tighten your nut on the back side accordingly, and then that'll be installed. We'll swap the knob over, so this will be a blue knob. The only thing left to do is terminate all your connection points where clamps and stuff are, and then connect it to the prop governor. The last part of setting up this cable is connecting it to the prop governor. When we advance the prop control all the way forward, we don't actually want it to butt up against the nut here. Notice that's touching. We want to leave a little bit of cushion there. So when we set this up, I always set the pump or the governor up, or the carb or whatever control you're doing, by setting this to the proper amount of cushion between this point and here. We want this to actually bottom out on the controls on the governor itself, not this on the instrument panel. If it stops here, there's nothing proven to us that it's actually at full RPM or full forward out on the governor. So we want to ensure that by hooking up the governor, when this is all the way forward, that the governor's on the stop, that there's still a little bit of space there. You can find that space in your service instructions. So that's your cushion. We're going to set that to the cushion. So when we're full forward, the control doesn't actually bottom out on the nut here. It actually bottoms out on the governor side with the... So set this to whatever your dimension needs to be. You can look that up in your specs, but usually somewhere 1/8 inch to 1/4, give or take, but like I said, you can measure that based on your service manual. So the next part, we'll set the cushion here, and then we'll go connect the cable. Connecting the propeller governor on this end after replacing the cable is we have the connection point here in the bell crank, and that's going to go into that. Here's the other end of the prop rod, prop control there. And that's going to get connected via this ball and socket connection, rod end. So the goal here is, when we installed the cable in the cockpit, we put the control to the full position with a little bit of cushion. So all we got to do now is thread that rod on to the dimension that puts this bell crank in the full stop position. So if we look down here, here's the high RPM stop. It's not touching. So when this rod gets connected we want to thread it down on here to till that stud can line up with that hole perfectly without moving it one direction or other as this sits still. So that'll be the next thing, is just twisting that on to the height that'll just drop in that hole when this is at full. And then when we're satisfied with that, we'll tighten this nut up against the rod end to secure it, and then we'll put the nut on here. So that'll be next. So we've threaded this rod end down to the point where this bell crank is in the full stop, it's touching the stop here. And then that rod end just barely slides into that, and then we can secure our nut. And then obviously before we sign it off, we'll do an RPM check, make sure we're not going past red line. And that's a prop cable install.